Good afternoon, Professor.
ఇప్పుడు మీరు వచ్చినా కనపడతారు కదా.
ఇక్కడ నుంచి వస్తే కనిపిస్తాను.
తల కట్టు ఎయిర్ మార్షల్ ఎం మహేశ్వరన్ ఆయన ప్రొఫెసర్ కలాం ఆయన ఉన్నారా ఇంకా రాలే Good evening, Mr. Devy.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, it's great to see you here. Let's see what we can do together. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll do something.
So, Professor Devy.
Namaskar.
Namaskar to everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Kumar Ketkar is here, Rajya Sabha member.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I am there.
Yes. So nice to see you.
Mr. Devy.
Ashraf, everything is fine. Don't worry, please.
Ashraf, everything is fine.
Yeah. Yes, everything is fine. Yeah.
Yes.
Light
fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, everything is fine. Yeah.
Professor Kalam.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And I'm sure it happens to all of you. And let's look forward to that. And those who believe in gods may pray to your respective gods that something like that in terms of a safer environment for meeting should come about. Now, why the South Forum? There are multiple reasons for that, but let me just limit myself to a few. One is at one level that the global South has an economic kind of crisis, and I won't dwell much on that, just to point out that that's one of the ways in which you could look at the South. The second point is that diversity and the composite nature of South Indian society is something which needs to be highlighted and strengthened at the national level, because we are part of the country, no doubt. But some of the things are not very encouraging, and therefore it may be necessary for us to highlight and show the diversity and composite nature which we have in the South and take it forward. And the third one, of course, is to highlight the progressive traditions which have been there in the South. For instance, if you take up the last century, Jyotirao Govindrao Phule from Pune and Maharashtra, and then E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar, that's Periyar, from Tamil Nadu, have been very, very progressive in terms of the work they did and the kind of opinion they held in terms of being anti-caste and social reformers. So it's necessary that we highlight some of these things, and I don't need to say what's happening in the rest of the country, that is the non-South, for instance. Most of you know that, therefore I don't have to do something. Now, why federalism? In brief, ideally and actually, federalism should be a system where power is divided between a national, that's the federal government, and other regional state government, wherein states are not merely regional representatives, but are granted independent powers and responsibilities. To say the least, this doesn't happen. And therefore, when we are talking about inclusive federalism, democratic federalism, that is something we are trying to strive at. Now, this is not happening, we contend, and that's the reason why we can say that there are tremendous fault lines in our federalism as federalism exists today. Now, take the example of, for instance, just to point out what's happening as regards the federal kind of a structure, or for the center-state relations, or the other commissions which were there, we know there are fault lines. And that's the reason why I think some of the things that we are striving for maybe have to be carried forward. Now, one example which can be taken up in terms of how the center is looking at the states can be seen from what they have done in terms of the setting up of what is known as the cultural committee. There is a 16-member cultural committee that has been set up. And this is obviously or apparently to study the origin and evolution of Indian culture. Now, there are lots of issues with the constitution of this committee. One is there's no scholar or anybody who is a practicing kind of a social scientist from South India. That's one of the things. The second thing is that, to the best of my knowledge, they have not thought of including a woman member in the committee. 16 all-male committee. And is there any clear mandate for that? We are not sure. I don't think there's a very clear mandate for that. Now, this is supposed to be the committee constituted by certain people at the center to study the whole country. That I will come to another point which is there. But then in a place like India, where we know that there are scholars who have done great and extensive work on what has happened in ancient Indian history and even medieval and modern history, people like Romila Thapar and Irfan Habib cannot be neglected if you are talking about something in terms of having something at the national level. And if it is a properly constituted committee, you cannot omit people like these. I'm just taking two names because there are quite a few which people know, and therefore I don't go into that, dwell further into that, just to say that. Now, besides, look at the way the committee is supposed to work on. It's supposed to work on Indian culture. To my mind, India, as all of you know, is a complex, plural entity which has got different kinds of streams and cultures. And there are regional variations, there are linguistic variations, there are religious and ethnic diversity. And this is a highly heterogeneous and composite kind of a country that we have. And I don't think it fits in to talk about a culture or one culture. And therefore, I think the pluralism and the plurality, which has to be there in terms of doing a proper kind of a study, itself gets negated if you do not have a proper kind of a nomenclature given to the committee, which is that if it is said that they are studying Indian cultures, yes, that's more acceptable. Now, the other point which comes up is that when we are talking about plurality and the complexity which is there, as well as the multiplicity of Indian cultures, we again have to go back to the constitution itself, where as we look at in the preamble, it says, we the people of India. And that's where, again, I think I have written about it somewhere else. I just don't want to go too much deeper into that, just to say that I think we the peoples of India would be a right kind of a thing. In fact, in case we are talking about India's pluralism, and if we are talking about the multiplicity of cultures and diversity which is there in India. The problem with the center is that it mistakes literacy for education. You have a lot of people, the 16-member committee, and then I will point out one of the things which became a kind of a howler. But before that, let me point out that the committee which is there, to the best of my knowledge and the way I think about it, they are all literate. Some of them may have PhDs and they are highly literate with a PhD. But the question is how many of them and to what extent they're educated. Now, that's a question I think which has to be added. And one need not emphasize the point too much to say that, unfortunately, the way the state is looking at the scholars, they're looking at literate people. They're not looking at people who have education in the real sense of the word education. Now, if that is there, to point out one instance where this became a problem was that one of the members of this committee, the 16-member committee, talked about thousands and millions of years of Hinduism and of humanity. Now, the problem is we have included people who don't have a basic knowledge of how old or how long Homo sapiens have existed on the face of the earth. Homo sapiens, that is anatomically modern human beings, have existed on the face of the earth a maximum of about 3 lakh years, plus or minus 50,000 years. so if it is 3 lakh years that people have been existing, and if a member of the committee does not know that, I think it says a lot about the kind of education that these people have got. Now, the first people, that's about 3 lakh years back, they were all confined to Africa. And only around 70,000 years back, what is known as the out of Africa thing emerged, where people migrated out of Africa and went to different places, including, of course, to India. Now, the migration which happened to India can be taken, if you are being very generous, to about 40 to 50,000 years back. Before 40 to 50,000 years, it was a completely uninhabited land when it comes to human beings, that is modern, anatomically modern human beings, Homo sapiens. And therefore, you expect the members to know at least this. Now, all physical differences that you find amongst people in different parts of the world, that's what is known as the phenotype, came about as a result of settling down in various ecological environmental zones, and aspects like height of a person, complexion, eye color, the hair texture, all these differences happened as a result of the ecological niche in which they settled down. And the other factor which happened, of course, was cultural practices, customs, food habits, and languages emerged among these people in different parts of the world where they had settled down. Some of the places, for instance, in Japan, the oldest skeleton you'll find is about 17,000 years back. In the New World, there's the Americas. Maybe they were there for about 15 to 20,000, or maybe maximum 25,000 years. Therefore, the fact that human populations settle different parts of the world is not known to members of the committee. And they have started working on this. Now, the simple thing which is there is that this result of the report that's going to come out of this, ostensibly, and they're not very vocal about that, is going to be used for changing matter or content which is there in school and other textbooks. Now, that's a very dangerous kind of a thing, given this uneducated kind of bunch of people who are supposed to decide on the culture of the country. And they are going to decide as to what is the kind of material which should go into the Indian textbook. That's one example of the kind of fault line which exists when we are talking about federalism in India. For instance, the center does not have it. Therefore, to discuss these aspects in terms of inclusive democratic federalism, we have lined up brilliant and erudite speakers from different walks of life. And we will have that for today and tomorrow. Again, regret that it has to happen virtually because of the constraints. Now, let me say quite loudly at the end that it is the Indian Parliament that has done away with the question hour. So please do post your brief comments, suggestions, questions through the chat box. We are not averse to taking questions. Indian Parliament has its reason, if you think so, as to why there should not be a question hour, but there won't be any problem here. And therefore, please, any brief comments or suggestions which are there, or if you have some other things which you need to ask to the speakers, please do that. And please make it as brief as possible. And this is not to say that there's no question hour, it's to say that there is one, but the point is that we will not be able to take very long kind of questions, because the speaker also will have to take in the thing. And therefore, the request is that please do write in and chat on the chat box. We will take up some of the questions. Thanks a lot, and over to Professor Vijay Kumar.
Yeah, since Shri Sitaram Yechuri sir is already here, I will just take 2 minutes, and I will not, go into the details. And if we have a chance, and we can talk about it. Since we were talking about federalism, I thought one needs to take the meaning of federalism much broader sense. That federalism is often looked at only as a political system. But I feel that federalism, if you take it in a more philosophical sense, is not just a political system, but I think a sociological and cultural way of organizing a diverse society like ours. And finally, I would say that federalism is also a state of mind, because basically, we are talking about federalism as a kind of a cooperative or inclusive federalism where both center and the states can have equal share of power, etc. We are still talking in terms of the colonial model of the center and the periphery. And I think we have created, in our independent nation, we have created other centers and other margins where whether it is a state government or the central government thinks that they know everything, and so everything gets decided from the so-called capital city. And so I think basically federalism to me, because I'm not a social scientist, so I'm a student of literature. To me, federalism, apart from, I'm not saying it is not, but apart from being a political system, I think it's a system of organizing society. So it's both sociological as well as cultural. And more importantly, I think it is a system, it's a state of mind. Since Professor Kalam took the example of the cultural committee which has been constituted, I'll take one more example, and that's where I will stop. One clear assault on federalism that we have seen in the recent past is the new education policy, where the center decides on everything and the states merely have to implement those wise decisions. And so just to give you one example of, they are talking about one nation, one test. I still can't understand how some students sitting in Assam and some students sitting in Adilabad will have the same test to decide their levels of literacy or education or erudition or whatever it is. So this one nation, one test is a typical example of not just the entire NEP, which has maximum concentration of authority and the minimum amount of accountability. So maximum authority and minimum accountability. That seems to be the hallmark of the new education policy. And there are many issues in the education policy, but since we are talking about federalism, I thought this is one of the major attacks on the very nature of federalism in India. This is in spite of the fact that education is in the concurrent list, where state support and consultation is sought. One last point about NEP, for example, the National Education Policy says that it has invited feedback from all over the country. We still do not know who they took the feedback from, but also the very use of that word. Feedback was invited. It was never debated, right? And contrast this with the first education committee that we have in 1948 and 49, Radhakrishnan Committee, where the committee members visited the universities for nearly 6 months. They visited, about 32 universities, and they went around the country, visited universities, sought opinions of students, teachers, and administrators before formulating a committee. Whereas here, the committee says that they have merely invited feedback. So the NEP is another glaring example of the erosion of the federal spirit that the Constitution of India gives us. So this is my immediate example of the threat to federalism, which of course is threat to India itself, because I think what is India without its diversity? I think the very soul of India is its plurality and its diversity. And so I think if we talk about federal nationalism, I think that would be the best counter narrative to the monotheistic federalism that is being imposed in the country today. So with these few remarks, I thank everyone for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you,
Devi.
Professor Vijay Kumar.
Yeah.
We have, ladies and gentlemen, with us the Secretary General of the CPM, member of Politburo, and the leader of the Communist Party in the Parliament, Comrade Sitaram Yechuri. I must say that while he is extremely busy with the party day, today, tomorrow, the whole week, he's been very kind in giving time to us very generously on the basis of a discussion I had with him in the month of June 19, soon after the results of the last Lok Sabha, when I say the last Lok Sabha election, I mean the previous. I hope it is not the last election. Came out. Welcome, Sitaramji.
Thank you.
As you suggested, I will put before you a few questions. The first, of course, is when Kashmir was brought into the present condition last year, where the principles of federalism completely abrogated. Take on that.
Yes. Should we take it one by one, Professor Ganesh?
Well, I can probably add another if you, but one by one, if you're comfortable that way.
Yeah. I'm fine.
Or maybe I will add another, a little, slightly different. In the course of history of the 19th century, global history, European history, the nation state emerged. And in some instances, the nation emerged and the states were created. And so the nation was superior to the states within the nation. But in another trajectory of freedom and also the emergence of nation state, for instance, the United States, the states had their identity and a nation was created. In our case, there were, of course, the princely states, but the idea of nation had sunk in before India became independent. And while the constitution opens with the idea of nation, but moves towards the idea of federation in a very substantial way as it progresses. After independence, we paid attention to the personality, identity, creation, culture of the states. So in our case, if one had to understand whether the states, the federation of states is a key idea, or the nation and states subservient to the nation is the key idea for us, because the present scenario is very confusing. All of us lived under the impression that the states do matter in this country. But today, the states seem to be going towards an oblivion. So maybe you can join this with the Kashmir issue.
Thank you, Professor Ganesh Devy, Professor Kalam, Professor Vijay Kumar, and I'm sure Dr. Ashish Nandi and Tista Settlebad, who will join us subsequently. Thank you very much for inviting me for these conversations on inclusive federalism. And with your permission, Professor Ganesh, may I have a couple of opening remarks for a few minutes before I get down to the question of Jammu and Kashmir, if you permit me?
Well, we're all keen to listen to you, so you please decide.
Okay, thank you. Because I heard Professor Vijay Kumar and I heard Professor Kalam earlier, and to some extent, the Professor Kalam, but the point that I wanted to make is that the fundamental point I think that needs to be understood is that federalism arose as a concept in India as a recognition of our diversity. And because of this recognition of our diversity, any effort to build an inclusive nation, an inclusive India, which nowadays is being called the idea of India, that inclusive India, any effort to build it, cannot be without federalism. And this was a concept that was very, very furiously debated, like you pointed out, Professor Ganesh, that in the Constituent Assembly. And that's why the first article of the Indian Constitution says India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. Without the states, there is no nation. And the nation and the states coexist as a single entity. And you're right, because in the Constituent Assembly, there's a big debate on whether the first article should be, is a federation of states, of Indian states, or whether the union of states. And Baba Saheb Ambedkar had said that no, the federation word has certain other connotations which will create certain other problems for the actual functioning of the state and the government. And therefore, we chose the word union of states. And that is where the federalism is an inalienable expression of the concept of an inclusive India. Now, federalism will definitely come under strain, such federalism, if the concept and the intention is not to strengthen the inclusiveness of India, which are contained in other parts of our constitution, the rights and guarantees we give, etc., etc. I'm not going into that. But if the intention is to impose a unitary state structure for the entire understanding of a certain urban vision which emanated during the India's freedom struggle, that which today is the ruling party, which is guiding the ruling party, or which is the real soul of the ruling party being only the political arm of the RSS, where India is a monolithic India, and that is that Hindu or Hindutva Rashtra, as they articulated, and they articulated very eloquently. So federalism loses all meaning if it is a one nation, a unitary nation, a nation which is monolithic, and this monolithic nation is monolithic in all its dimensions. That's why when you talk of the education policy, when you talk of the cultural policy, or when you talk of the culture, when everything has to be reduced to a monolithic uniformity, that is the negation of Indian reality and the negation of Indian diversity and the negation of the need for an inclusive nationalism in India. So that's why when the evolution of the nation states that you pointed out, Professor Ganesh, which goes back to the genesis to the Westphalian agreements, treaties, where the nation state arose, you had the nation defined as the majority versus the minority. Indian freedom struggle. I'm sorry, you were trying to say something?
No, please continue. Once you've done this point, then I'll add another question.
Yeah, the Indian concept of nationhood during the freedom struggle emerged as, in fact, surpassing or overwhelming the Westphalian concept when we talk of an inclusive nationhood. It's not a majority over the minority, but the equality of all the elements of diversity that we have. Now, this will give rise to a different type of a state structure, and the reflection of that was in federalism. So federalism is something that is deeply connected with how we view India, how we see India, and I'm sorry, there are all sorts of sounds coming in. I was wondering whether some other recording was playing. Yeah, now I think it's better. So federalism in India, in our present context, is something to do with mere details of whether it is concerning the division of subjects between the center and state, whether it is the economic, financial division of responsibilities and the authorities, whether it is essentially the question of economic decisions that the state has the right to take, what it has, and now it has nothing virtually after the GST has come. So given all these things, federalism, I would like to view it in its holistic sense, and particularly inclusive federalism that you're talking about, in the holistic sense of the very understanding of what India is. If today India, that inclusive India is sought to be replaced by a monolithic, monocultural, mono-thinking process, the assault on rationality and reason that we see today that is going on. I mean, if all this has to be achieved, then federalism, whatever little of that as we have known of it, will not exist, and that's exactly what is happening.
Thank you.
And yeah, yes.
Your reference to Westphalia brings in a very interesting aspect of our present situation, and that is whether it's Bretton Woods, Westphalia, there is an inbuilt guarantee of a referee, of a collective pressure, and invisible security, Now, in this case, in our present case, this Hindu nationalism, which is completely oblivious of the presence of the states. I mean, the way the governors are behaving or the governments are being, or the concurrent list is completely being brushed aside. I mean, Vijay referred to the education policy.
Correct.
It is true with the environmental regulations and labor laws and everything. So in this case, between the nation and the federation, the inbuilt security would be the national institutions.
Correct.
Judiciary,
Correct.
Election Commission, in particular, the Election Commission. I mean, I'm not thinking of the CBI and but the Election Commission and the I think the judiciary. When they are caving in, do you think, maybe my reading is wrong, I hope it is wrong, but if it is not wrong, do you think the fight for federalism, which is normally not a people's fight in a country like India, should not, and which is only the fight of the states and the center, in a way a kind of second order fight, do you think this needs to be made a people's fight now?
Of course it is. It is a people's struggle. It always has been, in my opinion, though it got compartmentalized into state governments and the central government and center-state relations. But it is a people's struggle in the sense that it relates to the very concept of what is India all about. Are we an inclusive nation? Recognizing the inclusive Indian nationhood, I would say, not nationalism. Indian nationhood, and therefore the nationalism that will follow from that as Indian nationalism, is entirely distinct and is completely a negation of the Hindu nationalism or the Hindutva nationalism. So therefore it is a people's movement. It has to be made into a people's movement. Otherwise, whatever diversity, the specificities, the specialities that various diversities of India have, that will all be, I mean, with like a bulldozer going over it, it will only be a road roller bulldozing it off and creating a uniformity. Remember, Professor Ganesh, and I think all of us have to remember, India with its diversity that we have today, any effort to maintain our nation as India, as the Union of States, and to maintain our country, to maintain this inclusive nationalism, any effort would mean to strengthen the bonds of commonality within this diversity. If you make any effort to impose any uniformity, religious, linguistic, ethnic, whatever uniformity you'd like to impose, India will just implode. That danger is there. And to stop that implosion, the state structure will have to be increasingly authoritarian and totalitarian. And that is what exactly we are seeing today. So that is why it is a people's movement. And it is precisely from this understanding of theirs. You're right, Westphalia had referees and guarantees of referees. Indian Constitution also has. We have the guarantee of the Indian Parliament to begin with. Why is the Rajya Sabha called the Council of States? The very fact that that is the recognition, and the Parliament was the guarantee and the referee, that the rights of the states cannot be trampled upon, and how to strengthen federalism in the future. Yes, judiciary is very, very important in the process of these checks and balances. Election Commission that you mentioned, and remember, the Constitution gives the mandate only to the Election Commission, nobody else, to conduct a free and fair election with a level playing field for all contestants. Now, if these institutions which have to deliver the role of a referee, if they are undermined or they are made subservient to the political authority or political power, then federalism is in great danger. So it's not only the unitary character of the states that's required for a monolithic understanding, which is represented by the Hindutva, the vision that they have for India. But it is also the manner in which that is sought to be implemented by subverting every single independent institution. You've seen what happened with the parliament recently. All of us are seeing what's happening with the judiciary. You're seeing what's happening with the election commission. And this is a very, very dangerous situation. And therefore, the fight for inclusive federalism is a people's issue. And parties like mine, we've always maintained as a people's issue. We forced it at that point of time when the Article 356 was being grossly misused. And then the Sarkaria Commission was appointed. There were the conclaves of various state governments and the chief ministers, though it was the state governments. But the issues that were taken up were that which naturally constituted issues for a people's movement. So it is in that context that what you asked about Jammu and Kashmir and what happened on the 5th of August becomes all the more relevant and telling. Because you see, there is, like all agreements, the agreement of accession to either the Indian Union or to Pakistan was an agreement which was then bound by law. An agreement not only bound by law, but it had people's sanction in terms of parliamentary approval. That Article 370, which was brought into the Constitution, now they're making it out saying it's a temporary, it was a temporary exercise, this was a temporary provision. Yes, it was a temporary provision, it still is. It has to be replaced by the provision that should have been worked out by the Constituent Assembly of J&K. That process has not been allowed to be completed in all these decades. So the question is, what you have done is a complete violation of federalism. And there, it's not only the right of the elected state assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, but actually the people's will there. When they acceded to India, they acceded on the terms of certain assurances. And those assurances have been openly violated. And this is where the institutions of checks and balance come. Since that day, 5th of August 2019 till today, including a petition by me, seeking a review of this decision in the Supreme Court. They're all pending. The Honorable Court has not found time to hear this. I mean, it's talking of the TRPs and the drug cartels in Bollywood and various other issues. But on this important issue, the Ibn is just not found time. Now that is where the checks and balance lose out, and that becomes a very, very, very dangerous situation.
Can I?
Yeah, yes, please.
No, please complete. I mean,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kashmir is very, is agony for all of us. And I think the rest of India and its position on Kashmir is something which ties up with what is happening in the south. I'll give a small example. 2 or 3 times, the Home Minister, who is in charge of the language as a matter, I mean, as language is the subject, in charge of the Home Ministry in this country, unfortunately.
No.
Since the linguistic states were created. On 3 occasions, he batted for Hindi, and there was a strong backlash in the south. But as soon as that happened, immediately the trolls were trying to show this as north-south divide. Actually, the south did not want to be divided from India. The south is mightily proud of being India. In fact, the south has contributed so much to India's Indianness, despite being discriminated in myth, history, and in economy. I mean, in economic benefits from the center.
Yeah.
The south is contributing more to the country, but getting relatively much less. But I'll not get into that because I do not want to create any rancor here. There's a valid point I'm making is language also is a matter of cultural right of the citizens, and therefore the states, as US speaking, Air Marshal Mathesaran, who's present, flashed a comment saying that linguistic state reorganization in 1956 started. When the South asked for southern languages, just the dignity, not imposition of those languages or the this particular regime tries to divide the South from the North. My question is, how can India, I mean, how can you and me and others everywhere in India, particularly in Nagaland, in Assam, where the citizenship question came up, West Bengal is, is a case in itself, but Kashmir, Nagaland, Assam, the South. How can we make this an all India fight? Because any fight for federalism is immediately interpreted by the trolls as regionalism and therefore anti-national.
Correct.
In
That
my
is the
question, implicit an assumption, and that assumption is problematic. The assumption is the best way to fight this kind of nationalism is to emphasize federalism. Of course, the problem in the assumption is we do not know if nation is a necessary step in movement from feudalism to socialism. But I'll set that aside at the moment and only rest with this assumption that the best way to fight this kind of nationalism, parochial, myopic nationalism, is to emphasize federalism. But this federalism must be emphasized nationally. That is, so please guide us on this.
yes, but Professor, you're very correct. This has to be national. I mean, be a national movement, because in the sense that every troll today, if you just look at it a little deeply, every troll today, for them, India means only the Indo-Gangetic plain. And anything outside of that, that is demanding its constitutional right of equality that is being granted, that is seen as anti-national. Anything that talks of an inclusive India is seen as anti-national. This debate came up in the parliament on the question of language. And when the issue was raised and when somebody asked a question in Hindi, the answer also came in a South Indian language. And remember the famous case with Mulayam Singh Yadav, the Chief Minister of UP, writes to E.K. Nayanar as the Chief Minister of Kerala in Hindi. And Comrade E.K. Nayanar replied in Malayalam, saying that all these languages, according to our constitution, 8th schedule, are equal. Of these, the officially recognized were English and Hindi. But you cannot say put the other languages at an inferior level. Now, this is something that comes out of our constitutional guarantees, but the point is that who's there to respect them? Today, this entire cultural committee came up and people were saying that nobody from the South is included. Correct, that's an important point. But nobody from the South is not the only important point. What is this definition that says that it goes back to study the culture for the last 1200 years? I'm sorry?
12,000 years, pre-Harappan times.
Yeah, to the pre-Harappan time. Yeah, the whole exercise is to create a false narration of history. And that false narration of history can only come by demonizing something and somebody. And that demonizing in India, the easiest thing to use for demonizing is the Muslims, Muslim minorities, because of the long rule of Muslim rulers. Now, as far as the South is concerned, you see, our contribution to Indian history, I say ours because I'm also a Telugu speaking, Madras born boy. So in those days, and apart from that, that linkage. But I should say the contribution has been very rich, whether in terms of culture, architecture, or the spread of these values going up to, your Angkor Wat, to Vietnam, to today's Southeast Asia. So the whole issue right now is that anybody opposing their monolithic unilateral imposition of what they call the Hindutva India or the Hindu India, anybody opposing that is anti-national. Anybody opposing this government on anything is anti-national. So I'd suggest that we don't be so bothered about these trolls. When the Article 370 happened, you remember I went to Srinagar thrice. And on the last occasion, I somehow managed to procure through a habeas corpus. And people were saying, how are you filing in habeas corpus? How did this come about? So I said, this looks like the only way to enter the Srinagar to check out that. And that is how I could manage to enter. And upon entry, what was the first thing the political leaders told me whom I met? Today, the government of India is saying that they have integrated Kashmir with India. I'm sorry to say, you'll realize soon, India has been integrated with Kashmir. The rest of you will be reduced to our status of being a police state, etc., 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 which is what is happening today. Which is exactly what is happening today. So that is why this fight, this question of federalism, it's not only a question of GST and the financial rights. It's not only a question of misuse of Article 356, etc. These are all administrative structural matters. It's not only, an issue of the subjects, state subject, concurrent list, and the state subjects, and how they are being played with and distorted. These are all important issues. But the most important thing is, what is your conception of this Union of India? And that is it an inclusive conception, whereby the constitutional guarantee of equality to all elements of our diversity is ensured? If not, what you're saying is absolutely right, Professor Ganesh, that today you've seen the statement of Mr. Muvaya. Mr. Muvaya's statement today is saying that we won't accept the Indian Constitution, we won't accept the Indian flag, we want the Naga flag, and we have been betrayed by this government. And I can personally vouch for you. I'm willing to go on record. As soon after Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister of the country, within a few months, I received a telephone call from him, personally on the phone. He told me in Hindi, of course. He said, Sitaram Bhai, that I'll translate it. He said, we have achieved what has not been achieved in the last so many decades. I said, what? We have come to an agreement, a Naga agreement, and now there shall be peace there. I said, congratulations, Mr. Prime Minister. If that is the case, and please let us also know what is the agreement. Till date, the document has not been made public, till date. So you'll have these problems, what you said about Nagaland, about the Northeast. If you have a problem with Nagaland, you'll have it with Mizoram, and most importantly with Manipur, and in Assam with the NRC, and the whole of the borders of Bengal. All this entire borders of Bengal, particularly in North Bengal. So these are very, very serious problems that can be kept united only when you recognize the need to grant equality to all these elements and of diversity, and which is what, in my opinion, is the political content of federalism. Federalism means what? It's not only an administrative structure. Federalism is a conception of saying we are a union of different entities. We are a union of different diversities. And that is what will be the basis for a people's movement.
I think in this movement, people, all social classes and political parties will have to come together.
Yes. Yes.
Because if I take this point to a village, the village would be more interested in its agriculture.
Correct.
Rather than federalism. Of course, it can be translated if one had the great gift like Gandhi to translate difficult concepts into very simple languages. But such a move is necessary, and we in the South Forum particularly feel that south of the Vindhyas, Maharashtra to Kerala, that it is possible to develop such a kind of front.
Yes, it is. It is.
And perhaps this, what you said about the Constitution, the flag, and 5th September might as well be the date of birth for the Second Republic. First, 5th August, not 5th September, 5th August. Sorry for that slip.
I know.
Freudian. I wanted to postpone it by a month.
those are all good wishes, Professor Ganesh, but you're right. There is a new political narrative.
Yeah.
There's a new political narrative that they have begun. The narrative is for you and me, 15th August 1947 is the day when India got its independence. 5th August 2019 and 5th August 2020, when the temple construction was formally, officially inaugurated by the government of India, the Prime Minister, which completely negates even the distorted, in my opinion, verdict of the Supreme Court, where they delivered a verdict, but they did not deliver justice. That 5th September 2019-2020 is the day of India's real freedom. This is the new political narrative that they are drawing.
Yeah, here in Karnataka, I'm sitting in Karnataka at the moment.
Yeah.
5th September is the day when Gauri was killed.
That's it, symbolic.
So that is the hat trick.
Very symbolic in the sense that tells you where we are. But what your concept of what you talked about the South Indian states is very correct. I mean, in the sense there has to be a federation of South Indian states. I mean, more than a federation, a greater cooperation of the South Indian states, and I think that was seen in the case of the GST, the GST Council. The government was forced yesterday to retreat from its earlier decision. But unfortunately, I think a greater commitment on the basis of the governments in southern India, that must be forthcoming. I hope that they also realize, because this is not a fight for any one versus the other. This is not a fight for the survival of one government or one party or the other. Whether India itself will survive, if India doesn't survive, as we know of it, neither you or I or any party will also survive. You're right, this is the second republic. If you call the word republic, I don't think it's a republic in the sense any longer. It is the second. I wouldn't go to the extent of calling it the Reich, but before the Third Reich comes in. But it's not the. But it is a very, very dangerous situation. We are at the brink of it. Otherwise, the implosion of India, as it was said earlier, that is what is in the offing.
They say, thank you. I mean, the South Forum will be making serious efforts.
Yes, very good.
Conversations with different states, state leaders. With your help, we'll do it. Tomorrow,
please.
we are going to meet the DMK representative and the Congress. And but I'm asking you a question completely unrelated to what we discussed so far.
Yeah.
Permission.
Yes.
I mean, the feudal state lives by referring to the past and drawing a divine sanction for its power. Democracy has an idea of a future. It's not utopian, but there is dream that, you know, if we are democracy, we can become equal. If we are democracy, we can become really free, and so on. Times of this artificial memory, which has no capacity to dream and no capacity to remember its own past, which is myth-making ability. It has neither the ability to make myths nor ability to dream. The artificial memory is ruling us. I mean, the Modi has police and the army and money and the goons and everything, but the technology being used and overused is probably also the nemesis of this present regime, because there's a very huge inner contradiction in that. And falling back on your familiar terminology, do you see such inner contradictions in the present regime which can cause its decline? Is the decline of the regime guaranteed within itself, or do you think it will have to be necessarily people's fight? I mean, I'm asking a very huge question.
Yes.
Please take your time and.
Yes, you see, I would say it is not because of these internal contradictions. This regime will not collapse. It requires to be made to collapse by using these internal contradictions as well as a popular external people's mobilizations. in order to safeguard and uphold what we have achieved so far during our freedom struggle and subsequently in terms of this constitution, which has to be preserved. This is the constitution that is under assault today. And please remember, you're right, when the divine sanction is invoked by feudal rulers, remember the feudal rulers had the ruler and the subject. Here we have a citizen. There's no subject. We are all equal. That is the democracy in a modern state. Now if that is eroded, saying that I am the ruler, you are the subjects, we are going back, falling back. This is a throwback to the pre-Westphalian, concept of nationhood and state. And that is where we are being taken to.
That's why they're interested in India 12,000 years ago.
Exactly. That is why.
Habitat of the mind.
Right. That is why you go back there saying that nothing further needs to be done. Everything has been achieved 12,000 years ago. You see, now, what are you? You're exactly like the same philosophy, which says that you are only discharging your previous birth's karma. And that sort of a philosophy, which is actually a subjugation of the human being and subjugating them into silence. So Ganesh, I'm sure you would have read this very seminal work by George Lucas called The Destruction of Reason. The Destruction of Reason. I mean, he started writing this book when Hitler was in power. Finally, it was published after the Second World War in Hungary. Now, the question was that here are German people, the inheritors of the most rational, most progressive philosophical traditions of Hegel, etc., which in those days was the biggest advance in philosophy in the world, German philosophy. The inheritors of that philosophy, people who were brought up in that tradition, people whose consciousness was influenced by that, how did they internalize and accept Nazi fascism, Nazism? The conclusion that is drawn is because there was Nazism developed and grew through a systematic assault on reason. Systematic assault on reason. And what exactly are we seeing today? Gauri Lankesh's murder, when you said the 5th of August, September 5th of September. I mean, what is that symbolic of? The destruction of reason. The destruction of reason, it is absolutely necessary for them to create that mindset of what you're talking about 12,000 years old. To create that mindset, what is necessary is to destroy rationality and replace it with irrationality. And irrationality is the fertile ground for obscurantism, for backwardness, for all the myth-making and the myths to survive and to flourish. And it is that, you see, in the education policy, people pick up the nitty-gritties of it. My simple worry is that, you see, it's yes, in federalism also, center-state relations, people say agriculture bills that have now come. Agriculture is a state subject. So, but I mean, that's a violation. Correct. All those are correct. But the problem and I think where we are missing the bus is that we need to concentrate these attacks in this fight against reason. We cannot allow unreason to triumph over reason. We cannot have irrationality to assert over rationality. And in order to ensure that, it has to be nothing but a people's movement where, based on scientific temper, rationality, we'll have to build that. It's a long process. It's an arduous process. So that's why when you said the Second Republic, as I said, I didn't want to use the Second Reich or the Third Reich. But Lukas's work just brought back that point to me, that this is the actual battle of ideas that we have to confront. This is a throwback to irrationality and backwardness, obscurantism in all scientific thought, and throwback to unreason versus reason. That is where the battle has to be taken to the people's level.
Well, comrade, thank you so much. This certainly is an attack on the civility, uh, reason, rational thinking, scientific thought.
Scientific temper.
For us in this country, and we will all have to, normally you mentioned the term citizen, and citizens normally felt for a very long time that they do their work and the political parties will do their work. But the time has come when the citizens and the parties and the institutions that are available and the spaces, cultural spaces that are available, all will have to come together.
Exactly.
On a war footing, actually, because it's a civilizational crisis of unprecedented nature in our country. So we'll have to, about reason, of course, following you, Professor Ashish Nandi is going to be here, and he has different views on reason. But the sense in which you use the term reason, I accept, and George Lukács is one of the most favorite authors of
Good.
the entire generation of those, but there is one ray of hope, I think. After Hitler's end in 1945, within a very few years, we had George Orwell writing, we had Hemingway writing, we had Albert Camus writing Plague, which was a deeply political novel. But then, because the war had ended, he had started writing it during the war. In 42, he began. It changed its texture later. So the hidden springs of freedom and reason and dignity and civility will still come to help in this country with that hope.
I completely share that hope, Professor Ganesh, and I think I want that to happen as soon as possible. But what we must all be prepared is for that to triumph, price also has to be paid. Unfortunately, what you said after Hitler's defeat, but till Hitler's defeat, how many lives did the civilization lose? That is something we have to prevent. I am also an eternal optimist. I agree with you. Finally, the human spirit will prevail. It has to prevail. But let us try and minimize the losses as much as possible in this fight.
Yeah, sure.
Thank
the
you.
Of the books took place. I am one of the authors who returned the awards.
Good, I know.
Detention camps have happened. We don't know what is inside.
Correct.
We are halfway through. Let's march ahead together. Maybe this proves to be an inoculation, which brings us a stronger democracy.
Body. Too. Thank you. And as far as you're concerned, all your efforts in this direction, you'll find all support from the CPIM. We'll definitely be part of these. I think a joint effort by all of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, sharing some thoughts.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot clap on, this way, Zoom. And in any case, I used to like clapping as a gesture of joy and gratitude. But after the nation was made to clap, I somehow feel, so I will make a sign language, I will use sign language and clap for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have, thank you, Yechuriji.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have, after this absolutely, enlightening, thrilling discussion with Comrade Yechuri, a discussion with Professor Ashish Nandi and a lecture by Tista Settleward. Now, Professor Ashish Nandi has had a little difficulty and is going to be about 15-20 minutes late in joining. So may I request Tistaji to take the podium, that is the mobile, and address us. And after she's finished, when Professor Nandi is come, we'll request him to speak. If Tistaben તમને આ કબૂલ છે ચાલશે?
Problem at all. No problem.
Thank you so much for
Hi,
thank
Tista.
Hi, Sita. How are you? Hi, Kumar.
Hi.
Good to see old friends. Professor Ganesh Devy is an old friend. I remember him from Tejgarh days when he was battling away as the Gujarat model was being sold to the nation. Thank you so much. I think, first of all, I'd just like to begin by congratulating the conception of this idea of the South Forum, because I think it's an idea long overdue. And for the reasons that it has been constituted, for the reasons that you have been meeting and conceptualizing the issue. And I think to be broaden it to the whole idea of federalism, and as been stated by many persons before me, that we have to be looking at, therefore, other states that have been marginalized, which are the northeastern states, Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, particularly Kashmir part of Jammu and Kashmir, and so many other states, regions of the country that feel marginalized by the actually a heavy-handed kind of unitary form of governance. And I know I don't want to get into a very legalistic kind of a lecture, but I do want to say a few things about, the need to be extremely convinced about federalism, particularly among those parties that have a national character. And I want to say this with due humility, not as a friend of all the political parties that we are associated with and talking about, because somewhere I believe that the kind of spirit we have seen from state governments in the last 2.5 or 3 months, particularly when it came to the farmers, anti-farmer bills, now when it comes to the anti-GST, the move towards against the GST, deliberate ploy by the center to financially cripple the states, and 10 states spoke up. I think all of this has been made possible because of a clarity of position among the states. But if some of this clarity of position had come earlier, I think it would really help. So I think that we need, while we march ahead on this mission, I think it's important to be able to weigh in with national political parties on the fact that federalism is not a negotiable concept which can be picked up at some point and dropped at another, but has to be something that we are wedded to when it comes to actually, as Sitaram so beautifully put it, celebrating of India's diversity, but even more critically, it is participatory governance. It is a governance that recognizes the regional variations, linguistic variations, cultural variations of this land that we call our own, and therefore is weaving together these variations in a cohesive format. Now, if we look at the Constitution itself, right from Article 21 right to the end, there are so many sections where we see a reiteration of this. I don't want to go into it article by article, but I do want to say that I find it very strange that one of the most seminal judgments of the Supreme Court, which was by a 9-member bench of the Supreme Court, and that too was passed, judgment delivered, unlike say in the Kashmir case, was passed pretty quickly, was passed nice and quickly within 2 years of it being taken to the court, was a Bomai judgment. And the reason why I'm flagging the Bomai judgment is because it does a couple of things. It reiterates inherently the very, very basic principles of Indian federalism, reiterating, like many Supreme Court judgments before it was passed in 94, that it's a basic structure of the Constitution, and that people are not only this thing and all. Federation and federal form of government has no fixed meaning. It talks about how governors should be appointed. And that is very important to remember, because governors should be, according to constitutional principles, be appointed after consultation with chief ministers. But you have seen complete erosion of the post of governor. And what began in earlier regimes as kind of policemen, IB officials, ex-CBI directors being made governors, which is also a problem, by the way. And let's face it, when institutional collapse happens, it doesn't happen overnight. Today, you're seeing irrational ideologues in the seat of governor. So whether it is something that happens in Maharashtra or something that happened in Tripura or something that's happening in West Bengal, you are seeing this constitutional authority being undermined by an ideology that inherently believes in the overthrow of the Constitution. So the governor's post is being completely misused, which is a constitutional post. Now, when we speak about, to look at it very, very technically, you have the lists under the schedule of the Constitution, the union list, which is 97 subjects, the state list, which has 66 subjects, the concurrent list, which has 47 subjects. Something like education, for instance, comes under the concurrent list. And if it comes under the concurrent list, yes, you can have a national education policy, which is hugely problematic, but you cannot tell the states that you cannot have your own policy. Whereas this is just what is happening. And therefore, I want to plead with the governments from opposition states that please remember the 1999 to 2004 Vajpayee NDA-1 government, when the first attempt, if Mr. Yechuri will recall, of trying to introduce value education of a completely majoritarian sectarian character was introduced by the Vajpayee government. Murli Manohar Joshi was the HRD minister at that time. It's not the first time it's happening. Even the supporter governments, TDP included, Chandrababu Naidu included, from the south, walked out of the ministry and the CABE meeting, saying that we will not accept this change in education policy. So obviously this is a majority government, so you can't see that happening. CABE is not even being called by this government. But I think it is important for the states of the south with the new education policy to assert that under the concurrent list, you cannot push down a national policy when actually we have the right to make our own policy in matters of education and culture. I think we need to, if you're talking about taking this concept to masses of the people and building a people's movement, I think it's very important to use a language that appeals to people. So I think we need to tell people, why are we talking about federalism and this entire myth making around a strong India, a $1 trillion economy, a superpower, buying Rafale jets, etc. That is not the India that we are looking at. We're looking at an India which has education for all, which has public health for all, which actually respects free speech, which makes a distinction between free speech and hate speech. Because my Article 19 powers cannot abuse either Professor Ganesh Devy, Kumar Ketkar, Professor Kalam's right to life with dignity and right to life with equality before the law. So my Article 19 cannot take away somebody else's Article 14 and 21. We need to articulate this to the people so that people begin to understand that is why we are against hate speech, because hate speech already hits at a targeted section, which is already economically, socially, and culturally marginalized. And therefore, free speech is very distinct from hate speech. As completely brilliantly put by Sitaramji, yes, the abrogation of Article 370 was not just an abuse of Article 2.3 of the Constitution and what we are, and also the instrument of accession, also the non-respect of the Constituent Assembly, but the manner in which the Supreme Court of India delayed hearing those matters, is consistently delaying hearing those matters, actually makes a mockery of the constitutional principle of division of powers and balance of powers. Because the Constitution believes that, yes, it's a union of states. India is a union of states where the union will look after certain issues, but the state is equally not allowed by the center, but empowered by the Constitution. Empowered by the Constitution to look at certain other issues for which it is in a better position to do so. And in matters of conflict, we've had conflicts in the past, the West Bengal case, we've had the Rajasthan case, we've had the Keshavananda Bharti case, we've had Gajendra Katkar speaking on it, we've had the Bomai case. Many a time, the whole federal question has come up before the courts, but the courts have adjudicated. One way or the other, they have adjudicated. One recent example of 2018, a judgment given by a much vilified Chief Justice, by the way, and we realized that after his vilification, the other Chief Justices that followed were only worse. I'm talking about Justice Deepak Mishra. He gave the judgment in the Aam Aadmi Party, NCT Delhi versus Union of India case, where Aam Aadmi Party actually was fighting for its right as statehood. And again, the federal principles were emphasized, that you cannot take away the right that is given under the Constitution. It is not a right that is conferred by the union government. So you've had a slew of judgments in the past, but today we are at a juncture at which who decides what are the basic principles of the Constitution or not? It is supposed to be the constitutional courts, supposed to be the higher judiciary. But when the higher judiciary itself gets compromised to such an extent, where do we go? And this has been addressed by my esteemed panelists also. And the question of a resistance, the question of a people's movement, the question of constantly talking about it. But let's celebrate for a minute two minor victories. One is the GST decision yesterday, which came because 10 states stood their ground. And the other is the farmers' bills, the anti-farmer bills. I mean, I saw for the first time the Congress party being very articulate on the fact that it is a violation of federal principles. Now, I'm saying this as a friend of the Congress party. I'm not to critique it. I want to emphasize that parties which are national sometimes do not see the dangers to federalism, and therefore we need to convince them that to have a robust democracy and the idea of India to flourish, the diversity of India to flourish, the linguistic, cultural, religious diversity of India to flourish, the federal principle of fiscal independence and fiscal autonomy and legal autonomy also needs to be emphasized. And therefore, the manner in which the farmers' bills have been challenged by these different states, especially assembly session is being called by Punjab, and maybe other states are going to follow, also tells us that this is an assertion of federalism. Similarly, and I'm making another proposition here, that the EVM issue, the electronic voting machine issue, is a much debated issue. I don't want to go into the merits of whether the EVMs have been or have not been, or to what extent they've been tampered with. We have different views on it. But I want to posit, which I've just published an article on my website, this very interesting article, which says that actually state assemblies, and this is important for the South group to consider, state assemblies with opposition governments are empowered under Article 328 of the Constitution to order greater VPAT verification through rather than the 2% that the Election Commission of India has been authorizing. What was the debate about the EVM? That we want the paper trail to be validated by us. Without the paper trail, we don't believe that the electronic machine is 100% all right. The Supreme Court upheld that in its judgment, saying, yes, the paper trail is a must. After that, no law has been passed in Parliament, but the Election Commission, through an executive order, is telling everybody that only 2% verification of VPAT with the paper trail is enough. We are arguing that Article 328 gives the state assemblies enough power to pass a law in their assemblies to say, we want a larger verification of the paper trail. So if you have a problem with EVMs, assert your rights as states and get the paper trail validated when your next assembly, before your next assembly session comes. What happened with the land ordinances in 2014 and 2015? After years of struggle by people's movement, the 10 years of UPA 1 and UPA 2 saw many laws being passed, which were long overdue. For instance, the Forest Rights Act, why was it not passed for 56 years? The Land Acquisition and Resettlement Act of 2013, Right to Food Act, Right to Information Act, many of these laws were passed in those critical 10 years. And that happens because you are an evolving democracy. Democracy, we had the 5th schedule, the 8th schedule, and the 11th schedule, which gave our scheduled tribes, Adivasis, other forest dwellers, protection in cultural and land rights. But till you pass a law in Parliament to actualize those land rights, the constitutional promise remains a dream. So the Indian Parliament, upholding the schedules 5, 6, and 11, actually passed the Forest Rights Act in 2006 because of large movements by forest dwellers, Adivasis across the country. CPM, CPI were big supporters of those movements. So the law was passed. Now, what has happened since? Post 2014, we are seeing 5 laws being passed by Parliament, which will undermine that law, which is your Campa Ordinance, the National Waterways Act, private mining law, now the latest environment protection legislation that Ganesh Devy spoke about. And Parliament has not yet repealed the 1927 Indian Forest Act. That was a British law, which Article 13 of the Constitution tells us we should have repealed a long time back, because any law that goes against the spirit of our Constitution should not stay in our statute books. So my humble plea is that as this forum gains strength and as our language in the public domain becomes proactive, we recognize some of this history. We factor it into our discourse so that we become more convincing to the communities that we want to be associated with this people's struggle for a more inclusive federalism. So, for instance, the first thing Modi-1 government tried to do in 2014, 2015, you'll all remember, was to try and completely nullify the 2013 land acquisition law, which the UPA had brought in, UPA 2 had brought in, through an ordinance. The opposition marched to parliament, took a strong stand, and the government was forced to go back in early 2015. What did the BJP do? In 6 states, 5 ruled by the BJP and 1 Telangana, which is part of the South. I want to point this out. State legislations were passed which nullify social consent, nullify the compensation provision, nullify the Gram Sabha resolution, nullify the fact that private and public projects cannot come in without the people of that area okaying it. Social audit was nullified. So whenever there is a step forward through progressive legislation, yes, a proto-fascist government like the one we have in power at the center certainly tries to turn those laws around. But what happens when even a state like Telangana joins in? It poses us a challenge. And I'm only putting that challenge on the table. There's a cultural dimension, very, very critical. Hindu, Hindustani, already talked about. This is not just about Hindutva. It is about actually a very narrow, crude, upper caste, if you want, version of a mentally created kind of a space. Because it's not only based on the Manusmriti, it is worse. Because it is militarized, it takes inspiration from Mussolini and Hitler. It talks about stratified, unequal citizenship. And it uses violence and threat. So the reason why you feel people paralyzed and not able to speak out often is because of the chilling effect of this fear and intimidation. So we need to, in our language of resistance, talk about the collectivization of fear into action, not deny the fear. All of us feel scared. But how do we tackle this fear? How do we deal with this fear? Can we collectivize it into creative action and resistance? That is the question. And I do believe that, yes, our constitution was born because of a certain period in history, Indian and world history, where concepts of freedom, equality, etc. were being talked about. But honestly, as a student of history and law, I believe something more. And here I would like to go back to some of our renowned historians who were referred to by Professor Kalam in his opening remarks, Professor Romila Thapar particularly, when she talks about early India, that, you know, this region of South Asia, Professor Devy, has not only seen equality and non-discrimination come from the West. No. The discourse between the Shraman and the Brahman, as she puts it, the dialogue between the Shraman and the Brahman is as old as early India itself. It's a civilizational struggle. That is why you had Mahavir and Buddha. That is why you had the Charvaks. That is why you had the Basavanna. That is why you had Kabir. You had the Bhakti poets. You had the Sufi poets. They were from this soil and they were questioning hierarchical structures which were iniquitous. When you had Phule and Savitribai Phule write love letters that were about drought and denial and poverty, when they lived in separate parts of Maharashtra, Phule was the only Indian leader who wrote to Martin Luther Sr. when he was fighting slavery in America, because he recognized the commonality between fighting caste and slavery. So I believe the roots of Indian constitutional values have come, certainly there were influences of the West, I have no problem with that, but they have been born from the discourses of the soil, which have challenged hierarchies. And I think we need to resurrect some of these images, because these images are very dear. Basavanna in Karnataka, Narayan Guru in Kerala. We have images everywhere. We have real life heroines and heroes everywhere. We have women bhakti poets, Professor Devy, that Rashtriya Seva Dal, whom you heard just now. They have done research on these women bhakti poets who said we have the right to be a single woman reciting our bhakti bhajans and not be wedded to the family. So we've had a very unique space within South Asia, which goes right up to Apna Northwest Frontier Province. It goes right up to Bule Shah. It encompasses different faiths, Guru Nanak. So I think somewhere in the language for democracy, revival of democracy, questioning, rationality, equality, we need to come back to some of these inherent traditions. I think we need to also point out to people what this government did, how criminal this government has been in the last 7 months. Apart from the anti-labor laws, apart from using the pandemic for the most draconian measures, I'm talking about how did they deal with the COVID coronavirus pandemic and federalism. When you have the concept of a supreme leader who can solve all your problems, and unfortunately, this epitomizing of this autocratic malfunction is revealed not through scientifically, rationally informed decisions, what should have happened? Immediately, if he was the prime minister of the country and not the supreme leader, he should have set up an interstate council of ministers with chief secretaries and bureaucrats so that states could talk to each other. They could decide what should be the transport protocol, what should be the health protocol, what should be the lockdown protocol, so that there would be some amount of discursive decision making. And states could have learned from each other's successes and each other's mistakes. We didn't have that. We didn't have that. You have a supreme leader who is not just a victim of narcissism and megalomania, but who is surrounded by similarly irrationally governed, short-sighted sycophants. And therefore, the language we are speaking on this forum, the language of civilization values, rationality, reason, questioning, scientific temper. What is our flag? Why does the Constitution talk about 22 recognized languages? There is no real Indian language. There might be 2 official languages, but we have 22 recognized languages. We have over 14 to 1500 dialects. And therefore, we need to celebrate this diversity in a myriad ways. I'd also like to stress on the fact, because other speakers may not do it, that how has this imposition by a authoritarian center impacted on issues of law and order, freedom, liberty, and fundamental rights and directive principles. The creation of a previous government, maybe for the right reasons, the National Investigating Agency, has been invested with a huge set of extra powers for extra crimes, so that people are being just picked up under a very draconian UAPA, incarcerated for several weeks at a time. Misuse of income tax and enforcement directorate to silence dissent. All of these are manifestations of this authoritarian regime. For the mission of the South to be successful, I think some ticklish issues which have to do with human rights, protection, fundamental rights, recognition, need to be treated by us like non-negotiables when we talk to the political parties who are governing in the South and who are governing in the states. We need to tell them, just like Sitaram said so eloquently, that rationality should govern. I'll add one more bit to that sentence saying hatred should be eschewed. There are some non-negotiables. So hatred needs to be completely eschewed. We cannot afford the language of hate speech and hate writing. We need to talk about terror laws and terror legislation. We need to talk about recognition of forest rights, land rights, farmers' rights. We need to say the fundamental rights chapter 3 of the Constitution, is as critical as chapter 4, which is directive principles of state policy, because the welfare state, the socialist welfare state, which talks about the redistribution of public resources, is epitomized in the directive principles, where we talk not just for a minimum wage of workers, but we talk about a dignified wage for the workers. We have to talk about transfer of land to the landless. We have to talk about why are so many public resources being pushed to private capital. The railways are being disbanded. Our public sector units are being disbanded. And somehow, therefore, when we talk to the governments of the South, there needs to be some non-negotiables. Adani cannot be bad in Gujarat and good in a southern state. No. Adani cannot be good if Food Corporation of India's private handling is now being signed over to Adani big time. Your entire mobile telephone operation is being given to Ambani. So a lot of these very sticklish issues about private finance and capital need to be discussed, threadbare with us, so that we do not make compromises in the short term. We should also look very candidly as to how our southern states and the opposition states are looking at police reform. From 1986 onwards, Director Generals of Police like Prakash Singh and others have been saying, we need to rehaul the police, it needs to be a people-friendly police. We cannot afford to have a Jairaj and that kind of custodial death in Tamil Nadu. It's a shame the way Jairaj and Benix were killed in a police station. So these are issues which are contentious. I'm raising them because if we want this movement to catch the imagination of the people, some of this internal searchlight will be needed. Police reform, don't have a high-handed police, don't misuse sedition, don't file FIRs against people who criticize the Supreme Leader and Supreme Chief Ministers under the Supreme Leader. Such FIRs are being filed in even southern states. And we need to talk about this. We need to talk about the condition of protection of violence, the culture of violence, and the protection of the right to dissent. So I'm not saying we need to use only terms like Dalit or Adivasi or Bahujan, but let's use terms which are as inclusive as possible. I know Kumar has been very, very concerned about how many under trials we have in India's prisons. And Gandhi, with all his other faults and with all his other confusions, had a way of communicating, as Professor Devy said, with such unique simplicity. And he said that those who commit crimes do so because of diseased minds. So a prison should be like a hospital where you try to take care of them and reform them. They should not be retributive places where people worry about dying not just from COVID, but from a host of other ailments. So maybe that's because of the field that I come from, but I do want to say that for the mission of this forum to be successful, some of these ticklish issues, which are very, very much linked to the question of federalism, need to be also tackled by us, while we stress completely that the Supreme Court of India, Rajendra Chenni, 65 to now, 1970 to now, Bomai has always emphasized federalism. Unless we have independent institutions with men and women who actually respect constitutional values and respect India's diversity and this rich history, you won't have that balance of power to be able to uphold federalism. And the day the people of India lose complete faith in all our institutions, that's the kind of implosion I think that Sitaram was talking about, which we need to avoid. We've lost a lot of time already. Today is the 6th or the 6.5 year of this, second year of this extremely proto-fascist regime. While remaining an optimist because of the nature of the work I do, because without being an optimist, I won't be able to carry on. As a student of history, I know that fascists are never really, they do not let go of power voluntarily or democratically. So what is actually going to be the tipping point? I do not know. I do not want to speculate. I do not want to sound danger bells, but already the cost has been very, very, very high. We've seen the cost of an absence of federalism in Delhi. You have a state created out of a union territory where the Home Ministry is actually controlling the Delhi police. And the travesty that the Delhi police has done, particularly from the beginning of this year, when they misused, completely manipulated, used hate speech. Home Minister was involved. They used hate speech against the legitimate, peaceful protesters of Shaheen Bagh and all over the country who are naturally were Muslim, because the Muslims felt the most existentially threatened after the CAA 2019 and the threat of the All India NPR and NRIC, the vilification of the protests began with a signal from the Home Minister in his election campaign. Fortunately, the voters of Delhi did not buy that, but the election results came, and soon after the election results, 11 days later, you saw the brutal violence. I don't want to go into the first few days of violence because both sides were involved, but hate offenders like Anurag Thakur, Kapil Mishra, Ragini, Parvesh, they have not been prosecuted because the Delhi police is under the complete control of the Home Minister of the country. And there you see an assault of federalism apart from anything else. And persons who are incarcerated under UAPA, about 22 or 23%, overwhelming number young people, women, and overwhelming number are Muslim. In the state of UP as well, national security legislation is being misused against the religious minority. So today, going by the very book that Golwalkar wrote, the internal enemies of this imagined nation, the Hindutva nation, are Muslims, Christians, and then communists. And in the word communists come everybody, the free thinkers, the socialists, everybody. So they've already earmarked this. They already target all of us in their hate speech. Their trolls are after each one of us. Many of us who on this channel are targets of troll. So we need to figure out how we build alliances. The Constitution gives us the space to do so. The Constitution upholds federalism electorally, culturally, linguistically, and politically. How do we actually make our opposition parties and our governments of the South believe in that federalism as much as they've stood up and believed for it when it came to the farmers' bills and GST? They have to stand up for it in matters of culture, NEP, communalism, sedition, all these other laws as well. Because unless the states speak up, it'll be very difficult for the people's movement to speak up on their own. I hope I've not taken too much time. Thank you very, very much. I always find this particular book, Professor Devy, very inspirational. I go back to it every time there's a lecture like this, which is B. Shiva Rao's Framing of India's Constitution, which is a beautiful summary of all the Constituent Assembly debates, apart from reading Phule, Ambedkar, Periyar themselves. Thank you very, very much.
Dr. Setalwad, one person who would have really appreciated your lecture today is Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Another person who would have felt thrilled listening to it is E.V. Ramaswamy Periyar. The third person who would have felt that India is in safe hands is Jyotiba Phule. We invoked all these three and more, and also, put before us a broader, larger canvas of how to interpret the idea of federalism. Thank you so very much for giving time. And you said your mission will succeed if you do so many things. Our mission is India's mission. It is your mission. And so we all will be together in it. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Nandi is about to join in a few minutes. But till then, if there is a question or a comment that someone wants to offer, we have about 8 to 10 minutes time. So I will request Professor Kalam and Professor Vijay Kumar to handle these questions for about, it is now 5:50 up to 5 past 6, because Professor Nandi is trying to connect within Delhi. So we have 15 minutes of conversation time with this Setalwad.
Yeah, if anybody has a comment, short comment or a question directly to Dr. Setalwad, maybe you could ask, or if there is a general comment you would like to say, you like to make, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, Professor Gam, my internet just went and I came back now. Sorry.
Yeah, that was okay. And because I think we have some 10 minutes time before Professor Ashish Nandi could join us.
Yeah.
Dr. Ganesh Devy said, if there are any questions or brief comments, you could take them.
Yeah. I just connected back from my phone because my internet went. Yeah.
Dr. Sitalwad, I just wanted to ask you something which is very basic.
Yeah, absolutely.
This whole, the very word federalism does not appear anywhere in the Indian Constitution. I mean, were we very naive to think that everything need not be in letter, that we understand the spirit of the Constitution and therefore we don't need to actually put it in words? Was that the assumption why the word federal does not appear in the Constitution?
Yeah, I think it was somewhat like that. When you go through the debates, it's not as if there were not people who, particularly leaders of the South, who kept on insisting that let's have the word in, because I think they were worried. They had the history of Periyar, they had the whole history of, that they were voluntarily joining part of this union, but they wanted something stated and put down. But like Sitaramji said in the beginning, Comrade Yechuri, that Ambedkar was saying that if we call it a federation of states, then maybe it will create the impression that a state is willingly joining, which means a state can willingly secede. That sort of fear. And also, let's not forget that we've also gone through a very brutal partition. So I think all these things were in the minds of people at that time. I keep going through those sections very carefully all the time. And you have leaders from the South saying, but what is the harm in iterating it as a principle? And then you have this kind of constant comeback saying that, we should not give any thing out for any particular state to cede from the union tomorrow. So this constant fear that there'll be a threat to the union itself was a fear that was expressed. And my only ability to read that as a student of law and history is to say that, let's not forget that the Constituent Assembly sat for about 299 days. And it through the period that we had partition. So you had a bit happening before and during and all of that. So a very, very bitter and bloody period did take place. I mean, that's a whole new area. I give lectures on partition, which also, according to me, is something that we need to talk to our young people about, because we can't avoid talking to people about these things, and there's a way to deal with these things rationally rather than arousing passions. So I think it's very important that the question that you raised is very, very important. Another word, by the way, which is missing, it's a different thing. I just want to point out to you. I again, as a student, realized this only in the year 2007-8, when the Sachar Committee report came out, 2006 and 7 and 8, when I started looking at Article 15 and 16 very carefully, which are the sections which look at discrimination, which tell you that you can have affirmative action. And when I looked at these sections and I went back to the assembly debates, I found that there was a subcommittee formed by the Constituent Assembly, headed by Sardar Patel, okay? And there were a lot of members. There were lots of very esteemed Muslim members. There was Frank Anthony and all of that. And right up to the time partition happened, it was being assumed that under Article 15, if I can read it to you, Article 15(1), which talks about which are the sections that are that should be provided with affirmative action, religious minority was there as a term, not because as religion you wanted to give affirmative action, but because it was recognized that many people from the religious minorities were actually economically much worse off, socioeconomically worse off. So it was argued. I mean, I have those pages, I can send it to you. Then Patel said, but we are all here for you. We recognize that minorities are this thing. Why do we need to specify this? So Anthony, in fact, says over there that Frank Anthony is the only one, because I think Muslims were probably post-partition were too insecure to speak their mind. But Frank Anthony says that today we have leaders who have the vision not to deny the constituent promise, but tomorrow India may not have those leaders. What happens then? And there's a silence from Patel, and then that word is not included, the words are not included. And then the minority says, okay, as a deal, don't touch our personal law. So that's the deal, that is, so these things have happened. It's a human process. And I think I keep telling students of history and law that we are lucky that the founders of our constitution, mothers and fathers, had the sagacity that we remained a secular democratic republic despite partition. It was a pragmatic decision as much as a visionary decision. However, there are also flaws. So this is one of the flaws.
Thank you.
I don't know, I'm sorry for the long answer, but it was not possible to
I
answer.
have a clarification. By using the word union instead of federation, can secession be avoided?
No, I mean, that's again a very contentious issue, as you yourself know.
The way things are going now.
No, according to me, nobody is going
towards that. Yeah.
Sir, the way things are going now, God forbid, if we go on like this, then I don't think anyone is going to be looking at the law or the constitution. If things get bad, then people will take things into their own hands, and I hope it doesn't come to that. But I'm talking about the concerns that were expressed at that time were around this concern. I was just answering that question. I'm, of course, not saying that anything can avoid anything, because if you create a situation and continue alienating sections of the people, then there will be decisions people take which will not be acceptable to even law and the constitution, etc. And that is what Sitaramji meant when he said about implosion. What do you mean when you say implode? That's what you mean. But the debate was around that concern. I'm saying the debate was around.
Explode also, not only implode.
I just have one question to Ms. Tista. Did the debate have any, I presume their main concern was recognition of the fact that India was, it's a federal union of multinational states, and therefore the danger of breaking away was always there, and therefore you wanted to avoid, even mentioning that into the constitution to ensure that there is no freedom to secede for any, particular region. But the reality was that it's a multinational state, and that gets re-emphasized in the 1956 linguistic reorganization.
Absolutely.
That is recognition of the fact. So we are a federal union of different nationalities and cultures, but there is a sort of interconnecting thread that connects all of us. So now trying to homogenize everybody under one nation, one culture, is not recognizing the reality, and you're actually threatening the very integrity of a nation that you built over 70 years.
Absolutely.
Shouldn't the constitution be recognized?
I agree with you.
Should the constitution amendment bring in that? Sorry, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm in complete agreement with you, sir. I'm in complete agreement with you. The question is, how do you get the persons we want to address through a forum like this convinced about what you're saying? Okay, that I think that's the real challenge. That even the South,
So the other question linked, but the question that linked to it is, I think we made a mistake in the Rajya Sabha. If we had made the Rajya Sabha as an organization representing all the states equally, like the US Senate, and having more power over the Lok Sabha, then this majoritarianism, which is actually a travesty of democracy, wouldn't have taken place in the way we are seeing it.
There are so many things we learn from hindsight, sir. So many things we learn from hindsight. I've been revisiting, Professor Devy, I've been revisiting the debate between Gandhiji and Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar on the communal award. And honestly, I have big reservations today about what Gandhiji said. If you look at the kind of the reserved constituencies we have, the kind of Dalit leadership that is emerging, which is completely pro-RSS and pro-BJP. So there's serious, but hindsight is it's also something which is a very problematic thing. So we need to address it.
Dr. There are many things, sorry to interrupt, there are many things that happen in history in the rush of the moment.
Yeah.
Heat of the
no,
day.
and I want to only emphasize that partition was a huge tumult. Maybe the South did not feel it.
Yeah, I think
but North and West and East felt it a huge amount. So some of these anomalies came because of that huge mass migration, mass killings. So some things were rushed through. I want to say some things were rushed through.
I concede.
You had 10 million people migrating.
I concede. We have to focus on the present.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are in two different senses, I'm saying the present. One is, of course, 2020, which is just 2 years before the likely general election coming to us. Not 24, but 22. Mark my words. the other sense of the present is Professor Ashish Nandi has actually arrived into this Zoom universe. Thank you, Dr. Settleward. Welcome, very warm welcome, Professor Nandi. You're at last here. We're very keen to listen to you. Professor Vijay Kumar is going to be your host. Professor Vijay Kumar is eminent professor of English at Hyderabad, and he will initiate this discussion or lecture. So I request Dr. Vijay Kumar to step in, and let us welcome Professor Ashish Nandi to guide us. Professor Nandi, the South Forum is an attempt to think of how the South can come to the rescue of India by emphasizing the idea of federation, federal structure, as against the idea of a centered, myopic nationalism. So Professor Vijay Kumar will welcome you, and then you please begin your comments. Vijay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Settleward, and welcome, Professor Nandi. I don't think anybody in this audience needs an introduction to Professor Nandi. I think he's easily the foremost public intellectual that we have. And it would be very difficult and I think quite silly to try and pigeonhole him as a psychologist or a sociologist or a cultural critic or a political commentator. And he is all this and much more. There is hardly a role that he hasn't played to perfection. I remember, I've been a huge fan of his writing right from the days of, his columns in the Illustrated Weekly of India about subjects as diverse as, colonialism to commercial cinema, from cosmopolitanism to cricket. There's hardly an area in our intellectual life that Professor Nandi has not illuminated. And obviously, everyone knows about his books from his early books on the colonial mind, the intimate enemy, and so on. He has, of course, been, as many of us know, he has been associated with the Delhi-based CSDS, Center for the Study of Developing Societies, initially as a faculty member and, of course, later as its director. And so he continues to guide us in our public discourse. And so, Professor Nandi, we are grateful to you for your time. And we are very happy that you finally managed to overcome the technical problems. And we are very happy to be. So we were discussing, we had Comrade Sitaram Yachuri and Dr. Tista Settleward talking to us about this whole concept of federalism and what does this mean in terms of as a concept, not just as a political system, but as a concept, and why that is so important as a concept for us today. So please, we are very keen to listen to you, sir. Yeah, Professor Nandi?
Yes. You want me to start off?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Okay, sir.
I would request you to have a look at a new book which I am reading. Started. The two authors' names are complex. The first author's name is Levitsky, I think, if I'm not wrong. And the title is Why Democracies Die. And it is based primarily on data from South America, because South America had a lot of despotic regimes, all started by claiming that they were enriching democracy, ended up as one-party systems or despotic, with a despotic leader each of them. But that is only part of the story. I'm just reading it to see what they have to say about it. But I would like to point out that today we have to be aware that India is not alone in this respect. There is Erdogan in Turkey, Duterte in Philippines, Bolsonaro in Brazil. Even to some extent, you can say Boris Johnson in England, and above all, there is Trump in United States. Only thing is this: United States, being United States, people have called him not only a joker and a clown, but also a dishonest scamster. If anybody said this kind of things to today's India, he will, she will be in trouble. And the threat of blackmail, threat of aggressive trawlers threatening you and your family is increasing. Now, in this kinds of regime, however, I'm reading another old essay of an old friend of mine who had died now, Lucian Pai, in MIT. He was a sinologist. And at the time, India had a one-party dominant system, the Congress Party. And it did deliver a reasonably democratic, tolerant state, except for the emergency. And the emergency did teach Indira Gandhi a thing or two. We are blessed with leaders now who are unwilling to learn even at the point of a gun. They know everything. It's basically a two-person rule, both coming from Gujarat, both deeply influenced by the Mahajan culture, and both unacquainted with large parts of India. Now, this problem of India's diversity, which is seen as almost pathological by the present regime, has also been subject of deep suspicion even amongst friends of all kinds. People were resisting the suppression of this diversity today. Because everybody had his own agenda, every party had its own agenda of what to do to India. And every party was convinced that if the diversity was a little less, then they could deliver much better service and be more progressive, as the saying goes. This was the conviction. And for this, two things, or I should say three things were necessary. First, India has to build a strong nation, because Indians didn't have a sense of nation. India had to build nationalism, because Indians were not nationalistic enough. And Indians had to build a state, not an ordinary state. State come in various varieties, but a proper nation state, the kind of state Europeans had. And we are dominating the world because of that. So this was the three goals which India set to itself. Now, this model, I think, was flawed fundamentally. First, India did not have a nation. This is not my saying. Tagore has written in so many words. The India doesn't have a nation, and it's not a handicap, he said, because India had communities, and India had interacting and intersecting communities. So there was a complex system by which every Indian who carried what you might call a multiform self-definition, or a multitude of selves, if you like to call it so, and at different times, different kind of allegiances took priority. When the country was threatened, his army fought. India became the priority. When you were not doing that, you probably went back to your agricultural farm and became a farmer. At that time, a different kind of village communities, caste communities, sects came into play. And this multiple allegiances of Indians always led to some kind of interacting. India was a great contact zone. Great contact zone. My eyes were first opened to it when I did a study of Cochin, where they claim no real serious communal violence has taken place for something like 3,000 years. That's a tall claim. I do not know that anybody has really explored the 3,000-year-old history. But for 600 years of recorded history, they have a point. And this multiplicity of Cochin, I once studied it, so I have a fair guess about it, consisted of very diverse communities. Officially 14 castes, but when I was studying, I found 18 sometimes, because even the Jews of Cochin had two castes, the white Jews and the black Jews. So I am making this point because what apparently looks chaotic was not so chaotic, really speaking. But this diversity was recognized, strangely enough, both by British rulers and before them, the Mughals. Indeed, I will go so far as to hazard the guess that the British, without acknowledging, learnt it from the Mughals. British India had 30% of the land ruled by princely states. Each of these states had one English resident. And he played a role, link was between the center and the state. And otherwise the states were relatively autonomous. They were not the paragons of virtue. They were quite feudal in many cases, and quite inefficient and exploitative in other cases. But they were often also very enlightened also in some cases. And there are states which have a unique record of never having a serious communal or caste conflict. Because they knew their people. They knew how to handle them. They were not all-knowing pundits who, sitting in New Delhi, ruled the country through distant and fiats and orders, and will always advise them how to be more nationalistic. Incidentally, I would like to point out that about 10 years ago, now I think it should be about 12 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, I don't remember it. There was a Pew initiative, Pew initiative. They did a global study of nationalism all over the world. I think not all over the world, 50 countries. the country which scored highest in nationalism was India. Highest. Second highest was Bangladesh. Pakistan was a third, but much not third. It's somewhere in the middle. India and Bangladesh was on the top. And European countries on which we thought we were building or modeling our state were even lower. Now, if the world's most nationalistic country had to be taught nationalism, then it's a very sad affair, is it? But what I think the present rulers of India want is not to accept that nationalism as valid. They want a different version of nationalism. This is, according to them, a false nationalism. Actually, I would believe that even few, the researchers were not sensitive enough. Otherwise, they would have made the distinction I have made in my writings nowadays, that between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism is given to us biologically. It's a variation on territoriality. Even cats and dogs are territorial. Even birds are territorial. That's why we could use pigeon males through them. Nationalism is not like that. It is because patriotism is a sentiment. It is sentiment. We are born with it. We like the kind of place where we were born and where we were socialized. So that patriotism is given to human beings. But nationalism is different. Nationalism is an ideology. It is not only a sentiment. So what is a diffuse territorial allegiance and love? Is different from what has an ideological baggage, which not only prescribes to you how this nationalism is superior to your and our kind of patriotism, but also who our enemies and who our allies are. So that's a different mandate, different kind of demand from us. And I am saying all these things because I think in India, federalism is not an ideological choice. Federalism is an imperative in congruence with and compatible with inner logic of Indic civilization. That we have the diversity and we have the capacity to handle this diversity. To us, this diversity is not a liability, except probably in the middle class and the politically minded, all driven by 19th century social theories and political theories. This diversity, we feel enriched living amongst that. We don't feel handicapped living with it. We have our definitions of that, and we have means of self-respect, the self-definition, in the sense that every community in the heart of heart believes that they are the best in the world, best in them. My colleague and close friend, Dhirubhai Sheth, political sociologist, he used to talk to me that in his village, a Bhil boy died. And for, I think, a week or 10 days, his mother sang Marasyas loudly. He could hear it. And the Marasya would say that come back again and be born as a Bhil. Don't by mistake opt for being a Brahmin. Your eyes, you will spoil your eyes reading and writing. Don't be in the next birth by mistake opt for being a Baniya. All day you will count your money. Don't be in your next birth be born as a Kshatriya. You will be fighting and shedding the blood. And yourself you will die in the battle. And so on and so forth. So even a humble, poor, pauperized Bhil family has that dignity. That dignity. This is not an exception, though this has been now broken to some extent, this self-confidence, because we have now developed a scale of progress. Now we have defined the backwards as backwards and the progressives as progressives. So it is this part of the story somebody like Tagore challenged. That he felt that this nationalism was a false ideology for India. He himself was very patriotic, and many people consider him nationalist. Still say that's because they are confusing the two terms. He wrote about 250, not 200, 2,500, sorry, songs. No. 50 songs, which are what you might call patriotic songs. Then Janagana Mano can be argued as one can argue and say Janagana Mano is the most universal national anthem that we have chosen as the national anthem of India. He was obviously not talking of nationalism, but so much so that you will be surprised to hear this, that Tagore holds the world record, which I don't think will ever be broken, that he has written the national anthem of India, Bangladesh, the Sri Lankan anthem was set to Tagore. I'm an admirer of Tagore's writing, so in Sri Lanka, that anthem is again Tagore. So this can happen to lead the time more
Yeah, there is a bandwidth problem. Please
I think
hold on
Professor Nandi can switch off the video so that at least we can hear him.
No, it's nothing to do with the volume. It has to do with the bandwidth.
No,
so
no.
Probably
What I was saying is that if he switches off the camera, the bandwidth would be saved, and at least we could hear him.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Professor Nandi, could you please switch off your video and just keep the audio? That might improve the situation. I think we have lost him more or less totally. To comment?
Professor Kalam, we lost the connection with Professor Nandi.
Yeah.
So if you receive any comments, anyone present here, Professor.
Meanwhile, I think if there are any, there can't be any questions to Professor Nandi because we have lost him. If there are any comments or some suggestions that people would like to make to improve what we have been doing, or anything else for tomorrow that we could take up, please feel free to air that.
Mr. Sambandhan to make a comment, and then if Dr. Abhijit Vaidya was here, if he's still here, he
Yes, Dr. Sambandhan, please go ahead. Dr. Sambandhan, we are not able to hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Dr. Devy.
Go ahead.
Professor Devy, Professor Kalam.
Go ahead, Mr. Dr. Sambandhan.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kalam and Dr. Devy, for this evening. My apologies for only being able to join a bit late. It is very timely that we are discussing the points that we are discussing today. It is indeed an opportune moment to revisit many points that both Tista and Professor Nandi Tista talked about, and Professor Nandi started on about the relevance and validity of federalism today. How are we really sharing our sovereignty, or are we giving away our sovereignty? It also takes us back to root questions about democracy, and I'm sure that going forward we will be discussing these issues. My only takeaway I think we would like to go away with today is the importance of federalism, not just between the union and the states, but also within states, between the headquarters and the districts. That is something which we have to take away today. And also, Tista's call about the whole debate between Gandhiji and Ambedkar. How is it in the present circumstances is also something we have to look at. Thank you very much again. This would be my starting point, and then
Thank you, Dr. Sambandhan. I think Professor Devy, you asked Mr. Kumar Ketkar to come in, right?
Yeah, and Dr. Abhijit Vaidya and Kumar Ketkar, if they're still here.
Mr. Ketkar, are you there?
Probably not.
No.
If there is any other comment, otherwise.
Hello.
Yes, Abhijit.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is Dr. Abhijit Vaidya.
Yes, please. We were, Abhijit, Dr. Vaidya, we were discussing in Pune just a week ago how federalism is important. Sangharajya or Ganarajya is the term we use. And now South Indian states in the South Forum are discussing that. So please.
So Kumar Ketkar is there.
Yeah, but Dr. Vaidya first and then Kumar Ketkarji.
Yeah, thank you very much. I must first appreciate Dr. Devy's all these efforts. And probably he's giving one outlet to a kind of, a blocked road, which was tunneling to the darkness since quite some time. I have just two concerns. Federalism should not lead to disintegration of the nation, because whenever we try to evoke a federal ethos in a country like ours, there is a possibility that that can lead to disintegration of the nation, and people may blame us for that. That is one thing. And at the same time, the kind of the fascist regime which we are having, Tistaji has very rightly pointed out that any fascist is never willing to leave the power. And there are very high chances that this fascist regime will try its best to maintain the power by hook or crook. So now we have to balance between these two things: the federal structure of the nation and at the same time the unity of the nation. And I hope in our forthcoming meetings we'll be definitely crystallizing these ideas further and further. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vaidya. Mr. Kumar Ketkar, will you please come in? Is Mr. Ketkar there? Professor Rajan Gurukal from Trivandrum. Professor, if you are there, would you like to come in and comment? Professor Rajan Gurukal. Yeah, Professor Dr. Sambandam, you have something to say? You are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Dr. Kalam, thank you for giving me another. I just want one little to set the ball rolling. This doubt which Dr. Vaidya expressed about federalism is something which I've heard in the past as well. So to me, it sounded a bit difficult to relate federalism to moving away from a nation. It sounded a bit difficult then. It sounds even more difficult now. So just to get what really is the concern, could we request Dr. Vaidya, whenever it's possible, to elaborate what the real concern about federalism resulting in, how is that process really? Could you just take us through that with the permission of Dr. Kalam and Dr. Devy, please, so that we could get something where we can clarify and sort of try to iron out the wrinkles. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to come in once. Mr. Devy, I would like to come in once. Just a short thing.
Yes.
Yeah, may I?
Yes, please do. Shanta Sinha.
Yeah. actually, I have been sharing the South India Forum with a couple of friends and others, and they're all welcoming it and thought that we should have a very clear imagination of what we are standing for. And as Tista had said, some certain non-negotiables. But at the same time, the fear that they had expressed is that it should not result into a North versus South. And there are so many South Indians in the entire country that it should not result in another set of hatred trolls that is happening. So this is a kind of warning I have received. So I said, no, we are not doing anything of that sort. But then we are talking about diversity and expression of our own of India's culture, and which I will talk about tomorrow, but India's democracy. We're doing this to strengthen India's democracy. But they said that you have to be careful about protecting South Indians in the country when you're talking about it, because otherwise it might, you'll have to be on the defense. This is the kind of a reaction I got from one or two. So I thought I might just as well put it forward to our group here. I don't see a danger like that, but I think this is a question that came up, so I thought I should share it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Who is coming in? Is it Dr. Vaidya or Mr. Kumar Ketkar? Mr. Kumar Ketkar, you are back now. You are here.
I can start from the beginning. You please go to the book and.
Okay, Dr. Vaidya, would you like to respond to what Dr. Sambandam was saying?
Yes, definitely. I would like to respond to him. My concern is that we have history of Khalistan movement in the country. We have history of Gorkhaland movement in the country. There was always some section which always talk about of free Kashmir. We had in the past movement of Dravidistan. So whenever we are talking about a very strong federal structure of the country, we have to talk about the unity in the diversity, and our focus ultimately has to be that. Now, my concern is that when we take this movement ahead, we have to convey this to the people of our country that ultimately we are strengthening the democracy and we are ultimately strengthening the India as a whole nation. That is my concern. And I'm just looking back at the history and that is why I just raised this concern.
Just to try to get another perspective to the four examples mentioned, chronologically speaking, Dravidistan, the Jammu and the Kashmir movement, the Khalistan movement, and the Gorkhaland movement. I suspect that there is, okay, let's take Dravidistan a little different because it was the pre-independence phase. It was the pre-constitutional phase. And as we now look at it, and as it was even then, it appeared to be more as a bargaining point towards greater power for states and state autonomy. That I think history is bearing it out right now. With regards to, chronologically speaking again, Kashmir, Khalistan, and Gorkhaland, I am not too sure if we are looking at it as causing separatism because of federalism or because of excessive unitarism, because of excessive work from the powers in New Delhi. The Kashmir story is very well known. So is the Khalistan story about a particular political party wanting to make its own inroads there. And so it was with Gorkhaland as well. So we see a familiar pattern, not about federalism enabling these discourses, but quite the opposite. A centralizing tendency, a unitary tendency, a tendency to hegemonize, for want of another word, by a particular political establishment over other regions. I think that is a quick-fire way to get to the apprehensions that others have over federalism rather than federalism itself.
Yes.
I agree with you. And the point that Dr. Sinha mentioned about South and the North, again, I would go back to a previous meeting where I would again call for the use of the word South Forum or something, because South is also a metaphor. It's also a non-geographic metaphor. You have the South-South Commission. It's not the geographical South. We have the North-South debate. It's not, again, the geographical thing. But it is a metaphorical concept as well. So I'm sure that we can win over a lot of people and allay those fears. Thank you very much again.
See, thank you. Is Dr. Ketkar here?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, please speak. We're waiting for you.
Well, actually, I don't have to speak much. I think there's an echo. Yeah, I'll just go out and speak. Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Ketkar is there.
Yeah.
Very clearly, please speak.
Yeah. I just want to make 2 points.
I think there is some.
I just want to make 2 points briefly. When India became free, the fears were expressed not only by the British imperialist intellectuals, but also by progressive intellectuals, including some communists, that India will balkanize itself, and the first step of balkanization was creation of Pakistan. Rest of India will not survive. That was almost a conclusion drawn by many leftists as well as many rightists, that India is not a nation in the real sense and it will balkanize. It did not happen, according to me, thanks primarily to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's leadership in the Congress. While Congress can be given credit for that, if there was no Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's leadership to Congress, perhaps the threat to federalism and to India would have come in the 50s itself. We must not forget that after that also, the Nagas were revolting, Khalistan was revolting, Mizoram had declared for some time a partly independence of its own. At one point, as Abhijit said, Dravidistan was talking about it. And the moment, and we consider unnecessarily BJP as a national party. BJP is not a national party. BJP is primarily a regional party of the North Hindi belt. It is not there in Bengal. It is not there in South except Karnataka. It is not there in Northeast. It is not even in Punjab. And yet we call BJP a national party. So it is essentially a party of the Aryavarta North Hindi belt. And if BJP remains in power, we are definitely heading for the kind of balkanization, perhaps not the way that was feared, but a different kind of balkanization. While we must keep the South Forum and the national integrity in our mind and unity in mind, we must not forget that nobody thought, even in 1989-90, just 1 year before, the Soviet Union got disintegrated on 21st December 91. Nobody thought it will disintegrate into 15 republics. Between 92 and 99, till finally Kosovo also went away, nobody thought after Tito's death that Yugoslavia will become 7 states. Nobody thought that Czechoslovakia will become 2 states by referendum. So let us not unduly imagine. Let us not unduly imagine
Yes.
that
Okay.
we are a given
I can hear Kumar Ketkar talking.
union. Let us not take it as a kind of an axiomatic reality. Pandit Nehru did not take it as an axiomatic reality. He worked for it. In fact, without him, this would not have happened. Similarly, we have to imbibe Nehru's ideas, not just Gandhi's spectacles for Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. If we give up Nehru, we are giving up Union of India as well as Federal Union of India, apart from secularism, which is already going away. So I think the time has come to understand the essential content of Federal Union, the experiment as nation. Nehru used to always say, we are a nation being built. We are building the nation. We are not yet a nation. That's why in 1948, Marathwada came to Maharashtra and Hyderabad Nizam was gone. In 1961, Goa came. In 1974, Sikkim came. And in 1984, we just survived that Khalistan was not born. So we are still building a nation, and the duty is to being a federal nation. But the challenge is very vast, and the longer the BJP rule is, longer the Modi rule is, I think we are heading for balkanization. That fear may come out to be true. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm very happy that Professor Nandi is able to reconnect. So I'll request him to resume, please. And Dr. Kumar Ketkar, thank you for your timely, reminder of what lies ahead of us.
Well, I think Kumar Ketkar gives me a scope to bring up certain issues which he may not agree with, but that's okay. But I think that as long as there is a consensus on the ethical point of view and the basics of living together in a meaningful way, it's all right whether you agree with on certain specific things or not. I do not think it is absolutely compulsory for a nation to build a nation. The idea of building a nation came to us from the progressivist ideology of late 19th century. Late 18th century, between 1850 and 1900, most of these theories came. I do believe that every country has a right to define what kind of state it will have and what kind of, whether they need a nation or not. For example, Switzerland, that small country, has 4 nations. It's a multinational country. It is none the worse for it. England had, again, 4 nations, at least 4. England, Scotland, Ireland, and Welsh. And this difference has not handicapped England. The idea of a unitary nation of the kind which Kumar Ketkar is pleading for is not necessary. I am not against it, but I am saying that option also is not terribly crucial. That we have one unitary nation. We have, as long as we have a meaningful unity, meaningful neighborliness, the tolerance of huge diversities, it's a different story. And I do believe that Indian society has traditionally been extremely diverse and also quite tolerant. Not always, it has its own pathologies, everybody knows about them. But at the moment, I'm emphasizing this part of the story, that what should be the binding cement of a nation state. Does the country become automatically weak if you have multiple nations? Was Britain in its imperial days weakened by the fact that it was constituted by 4 nations? Is it not true that even not now, Britain was willing, if the survey went the other way, Scotland separating from England, Britain? We know this. I do not think we have to have a unitary system and fight for it. We can live with a lot of chaos. India, the choice will always be between manageable chaos and unmanageable chaos. That's that for the moment. I will come back later. Federalism is given to the nature of the Indian people and nature of social arrangement we have with each other. We did agree through a constitutional amendment to give Kashmir certain rights of autonomy by Article 370 that it becomes Kashmiris. I do not think it was really dissent, not to the Kashmir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Nandi. It's always a great delight listening to you and the insights you bring and fresh perspectives. We all in the South Forum thinking together for the sake of India and also for the sake of humanity, how federalism could be a counter for nationalism and so many complexities.
Particularly this kind of partisan nationalism of certain kind. It is certain, it's not really nationalism. It's a pseudo-nationalism because it doesn't cover the whole of India. It's a nationalism which is presumed to be confined to the majority community. In that sense, it is like the Mussolini's concept of Italy.
Yeah. I mean, everybody in this audience is in agreement with that. It is not just Mussolini's, but far worse, because the way history is being used to justify is worse than what Mussolini did. So our in the South Forum, our thoughts are how we can bring this, federalism, diversity as values in aid of India, of our dream, of Nehru's dream, of the dream that the freedom fight had. And so thank you for giving your time. I will now pass this proceedings on to Professor Kalam to say his concluding thoughts or remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll meet tomorrow again to listen to the Rajya Sabha member from DMK, Mr. Tiruchi Siva, and Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and Dr. Shanta Sinha, who is with us again tomorrow afternoon. But just now, over to Professor Kalam from Chennai. And it's lovely that we're talking from Chennai to Delhi to Pune to Ahmednagar, Ahmedabad. I think, I mean, 3 cheers for that kind of federalism. In Hindi, they say, Zoom ke nacho aaj. We are on the Zoom today. Professor Kalam.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Professor Nandi, for making an effort to rejoin and then come back and make your points. Thanks a lot for that. And we have Professor Rajan Gurukal, I think, has been waiting for some time from Trivandrum. Probably he has a few things to say, and after that we will say back to each other. Professor Rajan Gurukal, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. You are muted. Your speaker is not on. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm very carefully listening to.
No, we are still not able to hear you. Can you please come closer?
No, see, I have very poor connectivity here.
No, now we can hear you clearly. So please, you're clear now. You're clear.
Fortunately, I was able to listen to the presentations made, the words of eminent people, but my connectivity is very poor here and I won't be able to communicate well. And specifically to this context, I don't have any comments to make, Professor Kalam. please go ahead.
Yeah, I think in that case, I think probably if you're joining us tomorrow, please keep the comments for tomorrow in case it's possible. Okay.
Yes, certainly. Yes.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. And I thank all the three speakers, starting with Professor Nandi, who made an effort to come back and join us. And before that, we had Professor Dr. Tista Setalvad. And it has been great that Sitaram Yechuri could join us in spite of his busy schedule and come back and spend time and also respond to some of the things which were happening. And it's been a great pleasure that we could connect. And it will be nice tomorrow again if some of you or most of you join back, and some others will be joining, of course. To start with Mr. Tirchi Shiva, who's the Rajya Sabha member of the DMK. And after that, we have Professor Shanta Sinha, and then we will also have Shashi Tharoor coming in. And thanks a lot for today, and look forward to having most of you tomorrow. And again, the best thing has been that in spite of technology, in spite of COVID, we could come together and join. Only thing is that we won't be able to shake hands. We'll have to say goodbye to each other from a distance. And that is something I think become inevitable. But as we said, we promise as soon as things improve or become safer, we will definitely meet physically. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody, and good night. And thank you also, Mr. Ashraf Ali and Vinod and all the technical team. Professor Kalam, good night. Professor Nandi.
Thank you. Good night. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you and good night. Thank you indeed, Professor Nandi.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good night.
Okay.